Okay, there it is. So you can either click that, or if you've already, I know our regular folks have printed the text beforehand. To Karen and Barbara and Eleanor, I'm not sure that we've met before, but this is a class that's given in the framework of the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County, which you know, I guess, by getting here. And I'm kind of a guest speaker from Palm Springs, California. I come with a strong background. I will be immodest about that. I come with a strong background in biblical TaNaKh literature and in rabbinic literature. My exploration into New Testament literature is relatively recent, just in the past 5-6 years. And before we began this mini series, we did a mini series on women in apocryphal literature, and I have a better knowledge of a Jewish apocryphal literature. That is the books, the literature that's from the last part of the first millennium BCE, right before the Christian period. And so there's kind of a continuum of material. It's not linear in that we can't trace a development of here, this is what happened to women. That's not what I'm trying to do. What I'm trying to do is lift up examples of how men, because it's literature written by men, how men view women in different ways, sometimes surprising, sometimes just typical of what we expect from these periods of time. But then to kind of reflect a little bit on what we know and what the group has studied without me, sometimes with me, but mostly without me in this last half year, what this group has studied on the topic of women characters in the TaNaKh, in the Hebrew Bible. That kind of gives a background, I think, to what we're doing. I hope that was accurate. So we do this by, again, we do this by looking at texts. And so a little bit about Paul, as he's known in the church, Saint Paul, as he was known in the Jewish circles, Saul, Shaul of Tarsus, a Jewish man that had an epiphany. He saw God while he's on a journey. That part of the story I'll leave for others to fill in. Even if you Wikipedia Paul, if you don't know anything about Saint Paul or Paul, you'll find out a tremendous amount. How he is thought to be really the person who did two things to early Christianity, which was a type of Judaism. One of them, I'm oversimplifying, of course, but one of them was to bring to bring the new understanding of Judaism, which is what it was, to the diaspora. And the book of Acts the Acts of the Apostles tells that kind of story. It's not written by Paul himself. We have letters that are written by Paul, but this is written by somebody later, kind of reflective, usually thought to be the same author as the Gospel according to Luke. And so it's later, meaning that it's at the end of the first century of the Common Era or the beginning of the second century. A lot of debates about that, not my expertise. But Saul did that. Paul, I'm going to call him Paul just to make things simpler. Paul himself becomes a disciple of Jesus, even though he never met Jesus only in his vision. And he kind of takes over the management of the apostles and sends them out to different places in diasporas. The first thing was to diasporicize, if there's such a word, this understanding of Judaism. One of the early scenes in Acts is in Jerusalem, in the temple, next to the temple. And the other thing was to break down the boundaries so that it was an understanding for non-Jews as well, for Gentiles. And with that came also, and I think that's kind of subservient to, or the next thing is subservient to breaking it down for Gentiles, is it's no longer a halachic approach, being very liberal in that use of halachic here. What do I mean? That in the Acts of the Apostles, we see that on one hand, Paul expects the Jewish communities to continue to circumcise and eat kosher and things like that. On the other hand, wants to open it up so that non-Jews will feel comfortable being part of this whole movement, this whole prayer groups and things like that. There's wonderful scenes of community, by the way. Really, and very different than what we find in Talmudic literature and rabbinic literature, but still from the same time and more or less in the beginning from the same groups of people. Anyway, there's a breakdown that non-Jews, Gentiles can be part of this, but even if they don't circumcise, even if they don't eat kosher. What they do need to abstain from is idolatry, and so anyway, that's a very very flimsy, a very very thin introduction to this kind of literature. What What we're really doing today is to look and see if we can understand what the author of these different writings that I brought today, Romans, the author is thought to be, at least this section is thought to be Paul, how he, what is reflected about character of women or women in his time, in his lifetime, and hence the name of this particular chapter of our study is the women in Paul's life, which also means women during Paul's life. Okay, so Megan, you want to start us off with Romans 16? This is the end of the letter to the Romans. Paul writes different letters to different communities, and we learn a lot about that from his thinking, and also what was the reality on the ground, at least in his perception, in those particular places.
I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon or minister of the church of Cenchrea, so that you may welcome her in the Lord, as is fitting for the saints, and help her in whatever way she may require from you, for she has been a benefactor of many and of myself as well.
So let's take a break right here. So perhaps a little bit surprising, right? Here's this woman named Phoebe who holds a position of authority, not or certainly of honor, right? There seems to be some authority. Diakonos gave us the word deacon, which is now used in the church world as kind of an assistant to the priest. But perhaps it also meant minister. It could have been a prayer leader, as we'll see eventually. Church here is not. Don't think necessarily of a church with crosses and things like that yet. Although he doesn't use the word synagogue, because that might be a formal place of traditional rabbinic Judaism. He often uses a word which reflects kihila, community. Okay, and fitting for the saints here refers to people who are I think devotees of the path of the way. I'm pretty sure that's how people understand saints here, and not people who are dead, holy people who are dead the way that we would use it perhaps. Any comments or questions? I should have asked for that first.
Well, he's getting the women together to help the women.
Why do you see to the women and not for everybody?
Just in this one little passage, I commend to you your sister Phoebe, a deacon. Well, it is for everybody.
Yeah, I think that's the point, Megan. At least that's the
Yeah.
point that's used in the study of women care. This is one of the key factors that comes up.
Oh, I kept thinking he's talking to another woman.
Yeah, no, she's
No, 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 no. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, that's my own imagination there. That
right.
he's
And
asking
sister, of
some of
course,
the
doesn't mean blood sister,
no.
right? We have that, and we have that in apocryphal literature as well. At this time of using of language, it's like we use today, sister and brother, and under the influence of certain
Right, so
communities.
he's introducing her to the whole community.
Hmm. And he's going to go on to introduce a lot of people
Wow.
who are and why don't you go ahead and continue reading, Megan? We're at verse 3 now.
Okay. Greet Prisca and Aquila, my co-workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their necks for my life, to whom not only I give thanks, but also to all the churches of the Gentiles. Greet also the church in their house. Greet my beloved Ephaestus, who is the first convert in Asia for Christ. Greet Mary, who has worked very hard for you. Greet Adonicus and Julia, my fellow Israelites who were in prison with me, who are prominent among the apostles, and who were in Christ before I was. Greet Ampliatus, my beloved in the Lord. Greet Urbanus, our co-worker in Christ, and my beloved Sacristus. Greet Apelles, who is approved in Christ. Greet those who belong in the family to Aristobulus. Greet my fellow Israelite Herodian. Greet those in the Lord who belong to the family of Narcissus. Greet those workers in the Lord Tryphania and Tryphosa. Greet beloved Persis, who has worked hard in the Lord. Greet Rufus, chosen to the Lord, and greet his mother, a mother to me also. Greet Antichristus, Philegon, Hermes, Patrobus, Hermas, and the brothers and sisters who are with them. Greet Philologus, Julia, Nereus and his sister, and Olympus, and all the saints who are with them. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All the churches of Christ greet you.
Before I ask for comments,
Oh.
I'm going to just tell you a little story. When I often mention Yair Zakovich and Avigdor Shenan, my two friends and professors at Hebrew University, and we worked on a project for many years together about Judah and Tamar story, Genesis 38. And there's a lot of, we went through all the commentaries, all the interpretations from interbiblical midrash to the 16th century. And we'd often be in the room talking about things that had to do with incest and how exactly. I remember once there's a long rabbinic discussion. How exactly did Yudah's sons die? What did he do when Onan was a coitus interruptus? Was it this? And we're talking about. And from time to time, one of us would say, Genesis 38, so that anybody walking by in the hallway wouldn't think that it's a bunch of guys, with locker room talk, just talking about, no, we're talking about this. This is what I felt like right now. I mean, Megan, do you have a religious background, a Christian background? Were you religious?
No, but I knew of it because I grew up in that community, but it
Right.
wasn't emphasized for me. No.
Well, if anybody here did, I'm sure this is, this is like, what are we doing? This is the Jewish collaboration of collaborating with whom exactly? This is it's funny. It's one thing when I read it and I prepare it. Another thing when I hear somebody else read it, like, oy vavoy, right? What are we doing? So now I ask for, after sharing that with, what are people, what stands out here? What are people thinking? What are they questioning? Go ahead.
Well, it's the openness that Paul has, trying to accept everybody he can, especially people who have maybe a little status in another type of church or religion, to bring them in, and that we shall all be accepting of one another.
It sounds a little bit like when somebody's thanking after they receive a reward. Or an award, an award of some sort at a dinner, and then they go, and I want to thank, like at the Oscars, I want to thank this one and this one, this one. Very, very expansive, very generous, right? James, just to point out, I don't think it's to other religions. I think everybody here is in the partnership in this cooperation towards this idea of God. This idea of Christianity.
Are they all of Jewish faith, though, originally?
Well, no. I think by names we can see here that they're not.
That's what I mean.
Yeah. Oh, yes. No, they're not Jewish, but they're Christian, though.
Right.
Right. Or they're Christ following, I think. Yeah. The names that are in bold here are names of women, and I needed commentaries for that. Like I needed to consult the various different things that I'm looking at for this, that I'm preparing text with, whether it's Anchor Bible or I've shown you this before, I think. I will show it again. This is a handy tool. It's edited by Mark Bretlin and Amy Jo Levin, but each of the books are done by different scholars, which means the greatest challenge is being able to read it because the letters are so small. And each book is a little bit different. It depends on who did it. Sometimes I would expect in the notes reflection of rabbinic literature, which is what I think this was intended to be, and I don't see it at all. I see it so it really depends on who does it, on who writes the commentary, and that's my subjective judgment over this. But it's a very helpful tool, super helpful tool. Those are two actually traditionally observant scholars of the New Testament, Jewish scholars of the New Testament, who have done a tremendous amount to bridge the gap, I think, between Judaism and Christianity today, contemporary. So it's between that and the Anchor Bibles that the various volumes that I've collected over the years, that usually look like the in the Anchor Bible series. The red ones are New Testament, the blue ones are Hebrew Bible, and the brown ones or beige ones are apocryphal literature. Um, and so I've over the years I've been collecting mostly from used bookstores, and I have a not a full set, but so I'm able to access things that I wouldn't know about. That's how I know these are all names of women. The ones that are in bold. Um, you may know the name, the first name, Prisca, in a different form. What would be another form of Prisca? Anybody?
Priscilla?
Priscilla, exactly. Yeah. So
Mhm.
Priscilla is mentioned, and Priscilla and Aquila. Aquila is the man, but it's noteworthy that she, whether we're going to call her in sometimes it's written Prisca, sometimes Priscilla. It's she's mentioned first. That's also an interesting thing, right? Uh, we don't know who the Mary is here exactly. Is it which of the Marys that we talked about last week, or is it just another Mary? We just don't know. Interesting that Julia is part with a fellow Israelite. That's kind of goes back to your comment, James, about Israelites slash Jews, traditional Jews or new Jews, maybe we can call them. Anything else?
It gives I only have a stereotypical idea of Paul, and we did the Acts, but this one paragraph shows his excitement about all the people and bringing that community together of all diverse, and it's like a meet and greet at the shul. And we have this, and we have this, and we have this, and we have this. So
Yeah.
uh I like this was a good passage. Yeah.
One of the things that I gained from our study together with Steve Kinney, and there's about 25, 30 of us that have off and on been part of the same group for the last 6 years. Some of you are part of that group as well. Um, and there are some that follow the class and we never see them because thankfully, like Rabbi Marsha has in this framework, we have everything on YouTube, and so people are able to follow these classes. One of the greatest lessons I've learned from the Acts of the Apostles and now from today is the kihilatiyut, the
Yes.
communality of this forming of community. Something I've devoted my life to, decades, to spiritual community leadership, and something I have terribly failed at when it comes to numbers and larger frameworks, especially. Not I don't I'm happy with myself. I'm not angry with myself. I'm not disappointed in myself, but I have not been successful in building community in a big way that I probably thought I would be doing when I was in my 30s and 40s. But there's some wonderful lessons here of building community. Yeah, and that's a good one that you pointed out, Megan. Thank you. And
So
James.
I just want to, this is like, I can't believe I'm asking this question, but the word church means congregation, which and what's the etymology of that?
The English I don't know, but it's the word that's used is it's koinonia.
Okay.
Again in the Greek, there's a word that's used that Steve always uses, which is kind of I call it communality. I don't know. I don't think that's a
Okay.
real word, but yeah, that's where but it comes from. The koinonia means to bring together, like kihila, hakel. Think of
Yes,
hakel, Rabbi Marsha, like
of course.
in Deuteronomy, right? To bring together, or the book Ecclesiastes. By the way, the ecclesiastical church that's used in church because it's kihila, it's
I
kohelet to
see.
bring together words of wisdom.
Oh,
Um, yeah, Hakel is a great word. From Hakel, those that aren't familiar, is a mitzvah, one of the 613 mitzvot commandments in the book of Deuteronomy, that the king, every 7 years, brings together all the people during Sukkot, all the people to Jerusalem. It's Deuteronomy, so it's Jerusalem. And one of the loveliest developments of new forms of spiritual Judaism, spiritual community in Israel that I was happy I didn't organize, but I was always part of it every year, already from at least the early 2000s, maybe late 90s, was this conference. Maybe it still goes on today, called Hakel, which was organized by a lot of different bodies, especially the kibbutz, this kind of Jewish renewal in the kibbutz world, different organizations. And you could come, it was kind of like Limud, those that were exposed to Limud over the years. Karen, you're from UK, and I know you're on mute right now, but perhaps you've run into the Limud festival, Limud conferences in the UK. I was lucky to be part of that as well. That's actually a better example. It was brought to California. It existed for a while in Southern California. It was brought to New York. It kind of died out in North America, but these were festivals, if you will, conferences where everybody could bring something. At least the original idea in the UK was that everybody could submit a proposal for a little course study session, and either people showed up or they didn't show up. And so you see these kids, these 18-year-old, 19-year-olds, they discovered something. And of course, all their friends would come. And then you'd see sometimes other people come and nobody came. Remember going around to all those and see if nobody was in there, I would go into that room to be part of it. And you hear sometimes bizarre, not interesting stuff, sometimes some really wonderful things. But the idea of 2,000 people, maybe it was more, coming together with families and older folks and children and activities for everybody, coming to learn Torah together, study Torah is a wonderful, wonderful thing. And prayer was there, but it wasn't the important part. So hakel, to bring people together, that's okay.
So one more question then. So when he says my co-workers in Christ Jesus, the grammar doesn't necessarily work for me. What could be how could you use that? My coworkers in something that would make sense.
I think that in our world it would be the what's the president in many of our congregations, the rabbi or the cantor, getting up at the end. And I want to thank Dvorah for reading the Torah, Dvorah and Miriam, and so Mr. Schwartz for reading the Torah, and Mr. Cohn, Mrs. Cohn for leading Musaf or whatever it is. I think that's the work. I think those are the co-workers.
I see.
And it's also, and we want to thank so because he's been giving a class. He's doing a learner's minyan downstairs in the basement. Oh, and so on Tuesday evenings you can meet so at the coffee house to study Introduction to Judaism.
So basically, what he's saying is my coworkers in building following for Christ Jesus.
Yeah,
we're missing sort of building a following to
building the church.
Okay.
Building what's known as, this is the early church. This is building the church.
Okay, thank you.
It's a little bit like Chabad. I don't mean that Chabad is like Christianity, although there are some issues there with messianism. But this idea of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson of blessed memory, sending out his people, his Talmidim, his students, his Hasidim, to build the movement. Now the movement there, you could say it's Chabad. I think we could be more generous and say to build the movement of engagement with Judaism. Birthright, was an attempt to do that in a different way. There's different ways of doing it, but all those things, what we say for the Jewish people, maybe this would be for this nascent Christian people, nation wouldn't be the right word, but movement. Yeah, that's my understanding.
You were talking about, the whole thing about community, we're on Leviticus now, the whole thing of sacrifice, that everyone had to go up to Jerusalem to do the sacrificing to bring the people together.
Right.
Yeah.
So a slight correction, James, I feel guilty now. This is the second time I'm saying slight correction to you, is in Leviticus, it's everybody had to go to the temple, the moving temple, the Mishkan, to do that. But according to Leviticus and Numbers, then there were different places around the land, the promised land, where the Levites and the Kohanim would do those services. It's only in Deuteronomy that envisions everybody coming to Jerusalem. It's the same, conceptually, it's the same thing. You and I don't do it on our own. We go there and what do? We listen, we watch, right? We bring, but we don't do.
Right.
And so there are, because I look at each of these sections, I look at the entire chapter to see what it is, and then I kind of whittle it down so I can get it on. I usually try 2 pages. This week I spilled over, of course. I'm not sure we're going to get to this, but there's a really important matter there where Paul differentiates between this and, say, the pagans where people themselves are doing the sacrifices. Maybe it's in the head covering section. We'll see. Okay, anything else on this section? Okay. Eleanor and Karen and Barbara, this is why, and David, this is why we never, at least with me, we always end up extending afterwards. It's mostly because I go on, but this is what we do. And this is on a section which is, this is not a theological section per se, right? This is more about, this is just an interesting view into a slice of reality, I think. And yeah, okay, I've said enough. Anything else?
Well, I'm curious relationship was with people who really followed Judaism and these people who obviously did not. How were they all viewed together?
Yeah, that's a fascinating topic. And there are, and it's a process that wasn't overnight. It was a process that went on, I don't know, 200 years or so. There were those Jews that followed Jesus in a very Jewish way. And these are not the forebears of Messianic Judaism today. That's kind of something that came up after. They might see themselves as so, but I don't think historically that's true. But there were those that really followed the mitzvot as much as they could, whether they were in the land of Israel or whether they were in the diaspora in different places. And there were those that didn't, and there's struggles between them. So for instance, in the Gospel according to John, we can feel some of those struggles. There's the author of the Gospel according to John refers to those breaks between the more Jewish orientation, more Jewish congregations, and the more Gentile congregations. So that's a thing. I'm not an expert at it. I've just kind of seen it from in my study. But that's a really, really interesting and complex question. What was the relations? Did they mix? Did they not mix? There are scholars who do a lot of work on this, and I am so I'm such a beginner in this whole field. I'm overwhelmed sometimes. There's like a movement amongst New Testament scholars that I don't know if it's everywhere, but unlike when I was in university, it always seemed like at one point Christianity just broke away under Paul. But then we see already in the New Testament itself, once you give dates to the different books, that took decades. There's an overlap. Matthew is very, very Jewish in its approach, and there's an overlap. But there's people what do they call? They call there's a phrase they use, the something that never was. It's something like the break that never was. It was because it took so long. There were groups in the 3rd century that we have their literature that reflect a very, very Jewish way of life, and yet believing in Jesus as the way. They called it the way, the haderech. Ironically, that word, the derech, the way, is what is used in Orthodox Judaism, not so much in Israel. In American Orthodoxy, people will talk about, I don't know if anybody has contact with that world, but they say the derech, but he's not on the derech. The derech is not on the way, not with us. Barbara, did you want to say something? Yeah, you showed your...
I just wondered if maybe what attracted so many people to the Jesus movement was that he's introducing a less strict, less, I guess, orthodox, and more of a compassionate form of Judaism, because the impression I get is that, the way the priests were working, they were very strict, very dogmatic, and here's these are people who had faults. They weren't perfect people. Yeah. And they didn't like all this kosher stuff. So he said, okay, all food is kosher. And he kind of dropped all this really strict part of the Jewish religion and put some compassion. Like he could understand there are people who have mental problems. There are people who have depression. There are people who have fears. And Jesus kind of gave sort of light and compassion to those kind of people. I don't know. No,
that's a great observation. So I'm going to answer in splitting it into two. When it comes to what we know from Jesus, whether that's historical or it's not historical, but what is the whole imagery that we have about Jesus from the stories, that is exactly, it's about a more compassionate, I don't say looser, but a more humane a more sensitive approach to halacha, and hence Jesus' arguments is sometimes with the Sadducees, the priestly sect, but more often than not, it's with the Pharisees, his fellow Jews that became his fellow rabbis that became what we call the rabbis of the Talmud. That's and that's what's really nice to where we see that, where I've seen that. I once spent a year co-teaching Book of Matthew, Gospel according to Matthew, with my friend Rev Kevin Johnson here, who's a UCC minister, and we saw that a lot there. That's why in Matthew especially, but in other Gospels as well. But then the other half of that answer is what Paul is doing, though, is what I found in Acts is he's insisting, at least in the first part of the first decades, or the first years, I don't know. He's insisting that the Jews continue to do all the things they needed to do. Kosher, circumcision, doesn't get down to the diukim, the exactness of Jesus. Whether can you heal on Shabbat? Can you carry something on Shabbat? Can you eat from if you're hungry, if you're starving, can you eat from the wheat on Shabbat? Those things doesn't get down to that level. But the big things, kashrut, I think Shabbat as well. I don't remember, but I think Shabbat in general. And certainly not idolatry, so Paul still wants the Jews to do that, but what he's saying is the Gentiles who don't have to, they weren't born into that, so they don't need to do that. And so his public is, I don't think, is the Jewish community as much as it is the non-Jewish community. So that would be my two-pronged answer or reflection on what you brought to us. But absolutely. Yes, of course, we look at it from a Judeo-centric point of view. Most of us here, I think, we're thinking of it from, well, what if this approach was brought today? By the way, this is what ultra-Orthodoxy and Orthodoxy said about the Reform movement in the 19th century, basically, and this is what people still say. Yeah. So, okay. Anything else? Whew, I'm out of breath, and we're more than halfway. We have less than half time. Okay, so do you feel like reading, Barbara? Are you a reader?
I don't have any books with me.
You don't have the text that you don't have the printout. Okay, so Eileen, do you want to read number 2 for us? Acts 18.
Sure. Now there came to Ephesus a Jew named Apollos from Alexandria. He was an eloquent man, well versed in the scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with burning enthusiasm and taught accurately the things concerning Jesus, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue, but when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained the way of God to him more accurately.
Right. So I'm going to request that we don't go into the detail as much of the scene itself. I brought this as an illustration to what Paul was referring to in the beginning of his words, or in verse 3 in Romans 16, and to show that Priscilla here she's mentioned first again, and it's kind of not husband and wife, this wife and husband team. And they set him straight. And she's prominent here. This is just an illustration of what we saw before. She's a prominent leader, prominent teacher. Right. And read another one, Eileen, from Corinthians. So again, these are all, when it says Romans, Corinthians, these are all letters to these different communities.
Now I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you be in agreement, and that there be no divisions among you, but that you be knit together in the same mind and the same purpose. For it has been made clear to me by Chloe's people that there are quarrels among you, my brothers and sisters. What I mean is that each of you says, I belong to Paul, or I belong to Apollos, or I belong to Cephas, or I belong to Christ. Has Christ been divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul?
So this is an illustration of somebody asked before and about the relationship between, I think Eleanor, the relationship between the two communities. There's a break in the communities. There's different interpretations. The nascent movements have all this inner politics, and he's getting a little snarky here. Was Paul crucified for you? Paul wasn't crucified. But I brought it really as an illustration as to Chloe being the go-between between the leader of this movement, Paul, and the people themselves. Whether you see her as a snitch or whether you see her as somebody who's turning to a higher authority to help, calm the movement a little bit. And in each of these things, there's a world of to say on each one of these passages when it comes to what did we learn from the community that was in Corinth in Greece, or what do we learn from something we know was, or we think is Paul's writing. I think we know it's considered, it was known to be written by Paul as opposed to something written by somebody else later, which is from the book of Acts. Okay, so we go back to Acts, and James, you want to read for us number 4, please?
Okay. We were there, set sail from Taurus, and took a straight course to Samothrace, the following day to Neapolis, and from there to Philippi, which is a leading city of the district of Macedonia and a Roman colony. We remained in this city for some days. On the Sabbath day, we went outside the gate by the river, where we supposed there was a place of prayer, and we sat down and spoke to the women who gathered there. A certain woman named Lydia, a worshiper of God, was listening to us. She was from the city of Thyatira and a dealer in purple cloth. The Lord opened her heart to listen eagerly to what was said by Paul. When she and her household were baptized, she urged us, saying, "If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come and stay at my home." And she prevailed upon us.
Keith, go ahead, please.
I just got changed. One day, as we were going to the place of prayer, we met a female slave who had a spirit of divination and brought her owner a great deal of money for fortune telling. While she was following Paul and us, she would cry out, "These men are slaves of the Most High God, who proclaim to you the ways of salvation." She kept doing this for many days, but Paul, very much annoyed, turned and said to the spirit, "I order you in the same name of Jesus Christ to come out of her." And it came out that very hour. But when her owner saw that their hope of making money was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the authorities. When they brought them before the magistrate, they said, "These men, these Jews, are disturbing our city and are advocating customs that are not lawful for us, being Romans, to adopt or observe." The crowd joined in attacking them, and the magistrate had then stripped of their clothing and ordered them to be beaten with rods. After they had been given them a severe flogging, they threw them into prison and ordered the jailers to keep them securely. After leaving prison, they went to Lydia's home, and when they had seen and encouraged the brothers and sisters there, they departed.
Okay, sorry, that was a big chunk to bite off at one time, and there was a skipping there. You may have seen the 3 dots before the last verse because it goes on a bit, but any reactions? Any questions?
Well,
I'm wondering, can you actually unpack that a little bit
Yeah.
for us? Because
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's not a text that I'm familiar with sort of in the
Yeah.
context. Are you
Okay, so
willing
let's take a look at the first part. And the first part has its own contribution to our conversation, in that before we meet Lydia, they're looking for a place to daven, right? They arrive at this place. Where do you find a place to do Kabbalat Shabbat? So one might ask, you look for the place on the ocean. Don't you have a Kabbalat Shabbat on the ocean once a month, Rabbi Marsha?
Sometimes.
Oh, okay. Sometimes in my mind, once a month you go to the
It
ocean.
used to be once a month. Now it's like 5 times a year. But
Okay.
yes.
Anyway, so you go to the ocean or by the river, because you like the scenery. right? And because you like the air and maybe the sunset, I'm guessing. But another reason to go to a body of water would be anybody?
To go in to like for a mikvah? No.
Yeah, well, it's considered to be a purer part of wherever you are geographically. Ezekiel, when he is in in Babylon, he is on the banks of the river Kvar in a place called Tel Aviv. Hence, we get the name for Tel Aviv. And the rabbis comment that why is he there by the river? Because outside of the land of Israel was impure, and he needed to be in a place where there was purity, where water, just a symbolism of being next to the water, is something pure, which is an interesting thing for us to think about subconsciously. Why we like water, why we like to. I mean, those of us that pray and meditate, I think we like to be next to water, whether it's a stream or the ocean or a pond or a lake, or if it's water that we bring into our homes with a fountain, with trickling water on a desk or in a garden, things like that. What is going on with us subconsciously? We have to ask Megan. Maybe Megan can unpack that for us. What's the water and the purity? Maybe there's something there. But in any case, they went to where they would find, where we're supposed to find a place of prayer. And in any case, they find this woman Lydia there. And her title is a worshiper of God. And she is not only a worshiper of God, in other words, she's one of us, but she's also a wealthy woman. And we know this because she's a merchant of purple cloth. Purple cloth is argaman. Argaman is the flip side of tchelet. Tchelet and argaman, royal blue and purple, and that kind of purple are made from the same little gland of a mollusk, which it takes a tremendous amount of these little animals to make this, to dye these cloths that color. It's the same gland in the process. Whether if it's exposed to sunlight, it turns into purple. If it's not, to royal blue, or the other way around. I don't remember which it is, but it's the same thing. It just depends on how much sunlight's allowed into the process. But this is expensive stuff. This is really expensive. Hence, it's called royal blue. It was for royalty. One of the reasons that Professor Jacob Milgren of blessed memory, he says that the tchelet on our tzitzit, for those that know the custom of putting a strand of royal blue on the fringes of our prayer shawls, is to show that each and every one who wears that, it has some priestliness in them, because those were the clothes of the priests, clothes of the kings. And so to elevate even the simplest person who's wearing that kind of thing to have a strand of blue, aside from the other reasons that the rabbis give it. Okay. So you've got this woman who's wealthy. She's in a position. She's one of them. She's part of the movement, and then she's in the background of that. And then the story ends. This chapter ends with her again. She's the inclusio, the marks of the beginning of this story, and so it shows that there were people of stature. In this case, woman of stature who was involved in the community, Lydia. And then you get this other story. A kind of a bubble of a story about this slave woman who's been possessed, and because she's possessed, she can do this. She can make money for her owners, and then Paul comes and dispossesses her. So I brought them together to see the wealthy woman with the power to help, and then the woman who needs help and gets them into trouble, and all this is backstory for how one of the times that he and his friends were sent to jail, were jailed. That's kind of my unpacking of this. If you want to read the whole story, I suggest if you've got time today or in the days to come, go back and read the whole story, because it's really interesting to see how the author depicts Paul and his buddies as manipulating the Romans. To show the power of God, power of belief in Christ, etc. But I just wanted to bring those two women. These are another two women in Paul's lifetime, in Paul's life story. A wealthy one who's kind of seems like she's the. It doesn't seem like she's the head of the sisterhood. She may be an organizer of that particular community. I don't think she's there just to lay out the kiddush. I don't think that's the point at all. And then this story within a story about the woman who needs help, and that also connects Paul to Jesus as far as healing and dispossessing people of these demons. Okay,
I'm sorry,
so a little.
but let me just ask you, David, in verse 19, are Paul and Silas actually looked upon as Jews to the eyes of the Romans?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely, absolutely. And you see here a little bit of anti-Semitism as well, right?
Mhm.
Look what these Jews are doing. Look what they're doing. They're not allowed to do this under Roman law. Paul is persecuted. The early Christians are persecuted wherever they are. Much of the stories, what we read, it's the persecution, and maybe this identification, maybe that's just the way the story is written with Jesus being persecuted. That's very much part of the origin story here. Okay. All right. Susan, you want to read the next section? This is the one that whoever is in touch with Rhea. So Susan, you can send this on to Rhea. Rhea will love this one.
Will do.
Oh, I'm
Be
sorry. Just to set it up, 1 Corinthians is really interesting. The section that comes before this is a kind of a depiction of the sacrament of the wine and the loaf. And Paul goes through good practices and not so good practices, and this is a really interesting mixture of two things here that we'll unpack together in the 8 minutes that we have left. Go ahead, Susan.
imitators of me as I am of Christ. I commend you because you remember me in everything and maintain the traditions just as I handed them on to you. But I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man, and the man is the head of the woman, and God is the head of Christ. Any man who prays or prophesies with something on his head shames his head. But any woman who prays or prophesies with her head unveiled shames her head. And it is one and the same thing as having her head shaved. For if a woman will not veil herself, then she should cut off her hair. But if it is shameful for a woman to have her hair cut off or to be shaved, she should wear a veil. For a man ought not to have his head veiled, since he is the image and reflection of God, but woman is the reflection of man. Ay, indeed, man was not made from woman, but woman from man. Neither was man created for the sake of woman, but woman for the sake of man. For Lord, woman is not independent of man, or man independent of woman. For just as woman came from man, so man comes through woman, but all things come from God. Judge for yourselves. Is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head unveiled? Does not nature itself teach you that if a man wears long hair, it is dishonoring to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is his glory, it is her glory, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if anyone is disposed to be contentious, we have no such custom, nor do the churches of God.
Let me say from the beginning some difficult words, and also Farblungent, my father would say about this in Yiddish. It's so mixed up and convoluted and what. Let's try to pick out some of the things that are rather clear. And I'm going to go for the positive thing that's rather clear. What's the most positive thing you can see in here from our point of view? I guarantee you there's a redeeming factor here. Women can lead prayer and prophesy. We got to be honest. This is one of those sections that's brought in the discussions of women. I've got the theology of Paul. It's this thick. I've had for years. I read different parts at different times. I met the author once in Jerusalem. I heard him speak, and I have this thing that if I meet somebody and they have a book, or if I know somebody and they put out a book, I'm I have a weakness, and that's why I have too many books. But this theology of Paul, I went to the index and I said women in Paul's writings, and there's 10 pages on it, and this is like a key thing here. Like one of the key proofs to show that Paul was shows us that women were leaders of prayer and prophesied themselves, whatever that prophesying means right now. That's not so important. That's a positive thing when we're looking at the images of women. On the other hand, he plugs it into what is the accepted thing. My what I think is generous way of reading this is that there's a reality, formal reality that needs to be dealt with. That women need to be in their place according to the world around him. But he also gives a theological basis for that. Yet at the same time, those women are, in certain situations, they are serving as the head of that situation. I hope I'm not being apologetic. So let's look at, first of all, let's see the very simple theological logic. Let me just say this, and then we'll get to the comment, Rabbi Marsha. God is the head of Jesus, right? Jesus is not unto Jesus himself, but the Father is. It's not broken down to the Trinity yet, but Jesus is the expression of God. So the head of Jesus is God. Jesus is the head of man, because Jesus is a man, and culturally speaking, socially speaking, man is the head of woman. So that's one thing here. The uses of head, and then talking about the covering of the head. The hair is kind of expressions of who is the head, who's in charge, who's the head. It's his proof text is from the first 2 chapters of Genesis. And as many of you know, there are 2 different stories in the first 2 chapters. The first one is we ascribe that to the priestly source, is the first day, second day, third day, everything very orderly, and then God creates humanity, both male and female at the same time, although he doesn't read it that way here, creates humanity in God's own image. And so, but because it says Adam there, we translate humanity, but it could easily, and it was translated by many as mankind. So man is created in God's image, meaning to say that woman is not. And then hitching a ride with the second story, the second chapter of Genesis, which is that the whole point is to show that Eve is subservient to Adam because she was created from a piece of his body. So that's kind of the theological background for this, is who's the head. So Rabbi Marsha, you wanted to say something, or
So culturally at that time, interesting about head coverings and how that's evolved. Of course, in our tradition, we cover our heads in men and certainly in prayer and study, so my question is, customarily in the era, did men always cover their heads?
No, we actually do know. Yeah. So a really good and great and important question. So this kind of stands out and said, well, that's not Jewish. Jewish men dafka cover their head. Well, first of all, let's just talk a little bit about women covering their hair. We have a few glimpses into women's hairstyles, and we brought this up. Any remember where this came up with a woman's hair? In Susanna.
Yeah.
When she is being brought out, she's laid bare, and there's two different versions there. One version is that her of the Greek text. One is that she's ripped off, so they can see her breasts, they can look at her. The other one is her hair is mifuzar. Not that it's uncovered as much, but it's been pulled out and the assumption there is that modest women would have their hair up in a bun. And when you're like this would just be in the intimacy of your own home. That's what biblical scholars would say of that late biblical period. In rabbinic literature, a woman does cover her hair, and there's texts about that. The only covering of men covering their head that we have is of certain rabbis who are venerated rabbis. They have their head covered, and there are certain cases, or when you go out and you walk on the way, different reasons, to wear something to protect your head from the weather or from the sand. The custom that we call of a yarmulke or of a kippah is very, very late. 13th century, Ashkenaz, from a particular place where there was this is very ironic, it's a really interesting glimpse into the irony of history, in Germany, so the area of Germany, where a decree went out that Jewish men must wear a cap on their heads. A cap on their heads, a kippah on of some sort. They had to have their head covering, and then that just grew and became an outward sign of a Jewish man to have his head covered. I don't remember. I did a study on this years and years ago in the 90s. I remember preparing a lecture on this about the history of head covering during prayer for men. But it's ironic that in Germany, the outward sign of being a Jew was once something that became a cherished custom of being Jewish, and then came over in the 70s and 80s to many women as well, as opposed to the star that we're all thinking of in the back, the yellow star. So that's a late development.
Okay.
Yeah.
But would it be fair to say, though, that let's say Jewish men living in Babylonia, Jewish men living in Egypt, what they in the same way that we in America, I don't think it's any different, wear the garb of America, like people who live in those things, not who are trying to really bubbleize or ghettoize themselves. Like, would they have worn the headdress of their Egyptian brothers and sisters or their Mesopotamian brothers? No.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. That's an I don't know. Good question. I see in footnotes that there's discussions of headdress in early Roman times and things like that. But one of the notes that I see in all the commentaries about this is it was the pagan custom to cover their heads when they were offering sacrifices.
Oh,
And so this was an attempt to say we're not pagan
fascinating.
during prayer. So a lot here that I don't know. I apologize for that, as I always do, perhaps too much, but I stand by my apologies and promise you, those that don't know me really, that I am so immodest that any apologies that I make here are just a drop in the bucket. I'm serious.
I wanted to ask you something, with Rabbi David. So, as would you be able to pick this up next week and go into your next lesson
Yeah.
next week? And I wanted to tell you that the way I structured ALI is that our next scholar doesn't start till the middle of April. So if you have some lingering material, it's Chol HaMoed Pesach, which I don't think makes a difference for anybody. If you'd like to teach on Monday the 6th, if you're around, that slot was open for you, left by
Okay.
me, in case there was more.
So it means 2 more times after this, correct?
That's what that would mean if you wanted to do that.
Yeah. Well, certainly, because I already have actually most of the text ready for next week, but I'm sure I'm going to find in the same way I found more this time. So I want to thank all of you and you, Rabbi Marsha. This has given me an opportunity to go on this adventure. And you guys, to those of you who know me, I love this stuff. Boy, do I love this stuff. Wish I had more time.
This
More.
is such a privilege for us. And I just, several people in the class have, when you're not with us, they ask where you are. So that's always that should make you feel very good.
Well, thank you. It does indeed.
I just want to say to everybody, I don't know if I'll be here next week. I want to, if I miss you, I want to wish you all a very meaningful and liberating Passover, which begins a week from Wednesday night. with your Sidarim. And I want to say again to all of you here who make this class possible through your donations. Thank you. It is it's like a small Beit Midrash that you've created for yourselves, and I hope it gives you as much joy as when I can pop in. I always learn so much, so I hope that's a meaningful experience for you. Thank you. And you can support us through the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County if you'd like to. And our next scholar after Rabbi Daniel Levine is coming back this time. I don't know how many of you did his 12-week seminar on the origins of modern Jewish thought. So when he and I were talking recently, the next class is 5 modern Jewish thinkers you don't know about who defined Jewish life in Israel and America. So we're going to have 5 weeks of 5 different thinkers that are less on people's tongues, but also very, very important in how we operate today. So I hope you'll join us for that beginning in April.
Okay, Karen asked me a question in the chat. This is the book that I have on Paul, Theology of Paul the Apostle, written by Dunn, D-U-N-N, James Dunn. Just to give you an idea.
Okay.
It's one of those. So in answer to your questions, have I read it from beginning to the end? No. I have many books like that. But for me, this is a reference book. And thank God, because there ain't no libraries like this, even good Christian libraries out here in the desert. All right, my friends. Be well.
Everyone, thank you so much.
Thanks for being here. Bye-bye.